Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Gold Medal Collaboration, SharePoint Engagement at NBC for the Olympics, brought to you by IT Unity and Colligo. I'm Jeunesse Castonguay, your moderator. User adoption of SharePoint can be challenging for even the most collaborative of companies, but imagine if you had to onboard 2,700 users in just 2 weeks. Today, SharePoint MVP Dan Holme, Microsoft Technologies consultant for NBC Olympics, will share how he leveraged SharePoint to foster productivity and collaboration among the 2,700-person media team in Sochi. Colligo CEO Barry Jinks will share practical ways to streamline the SharePoint user experience and empower your mobile workforce while keeping enterprise content secure. Now let's take a closer look at today's agenda. Dan will discuss the key requirements and his takeaways from the Sochi Olympics. He'll highlight new features in SharePoint 2013 that help drive user adoption, and he'll share easy wins to improve discoverability and usability. Barry will discuss mobility and security and how you can have the best of both worlds with Colligo Briefcase. After the presentation, we'll conduct a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime, of course, using the webinar console in the top right, and we'll address as many questions as we can during the Q&A. Our panelists will answer any remaining questions via email following the webinar, and everyone will receive a link to the recording and presentation. We have two amazing speakers today. Dan Holme is the CEO of IT Unity and one of the most respected voices in the Microsoft technology community. He is a sought-after consultant, best-selling author, and renowned speaker. Dan has earned the prestigious title of Microsoft MVP 8 times in 3 technologies: Windows Server Directory Services, SharePoint Server, and Office 365. He's been recognized as one of the top 50 SharePoint influencers and as one of the top 10 partner MVPs in the world. Barry Jinks is the founder and CEO of Colligo and has been a technology innovator and entrepreneur for over 25 years. Barry is a recognized expert on SharePoint client technology and a frequent speaker at SharePoint and enterprise content management conferences worldwide. He manages Colligo's popular SharePoint blog, which discusses important issues and trends in email and records management, governance, and compliance. Barry was previously named Ernst & Young Pacific's Region Entrepreneur of the Year for Technology. So let's begin. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dan Holme. Welcome, Dan, and over to you.
Hello, and thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Dan Holme, and as the introduction suggested, I'm an Office 365 MVP and the CEO and co-founder of IT Unity. And I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to share with you the experiences I've had working for an incredibly talented and hardworking team at NBC Sports during the broadcast of the Olympic Games in Torino, Beijing, Vancouver, London, and most recently at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. And today we're going to talk about delivering gold medal collaboration, how we drove engagement and adoption of SharePoint at NBC during the broadcast of the Olympic Games, and some perspectives and takeaways that you can go back to work and put in place for what I would call big, easy wins that will really thrill your business customers. As we go through this talk, please do tweet about it. We've got the @mentions at the bottom of the slide. My name, Dan Holme. My company, IT Unity 01, the producer of this webinar, and Colligo, our fantastic sponsor that's bringing this webinar to you today. There are also some very important addresses for you in the upper right corner of the slide. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for you to review on the Colligo site, as well as at itunity.com/go/danholme, where I will also post slides and resources related to this presentation. You can also reach me directly via email, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, and my personal and business addresses are in the upper right corner of the slide. Don't worry if you don't have time to write these down, because we will email them to you after the presentation as well, because I really want you to carry this conversation forward after today. Feel free to reach out to me and let me know what I can do to help you deliver gold medal results in your organization. So with that set up, let's dive right into the presentation. For the last 10 years, I've had the pleasure of working with one of the most amazing teams on one of the most amazing projects on the planet, and that is the Olympic Games. As you know, the Olympic Games are a mammoth event. The Games themselves in Sochi featured over 2,800 athletes from 89 nations competing in 98 events across 15 sports, and 12 of those events were brand new, including the super exciting cross events in skiing and snowboarding. There were 17 competition days in 12 venues, and over $50 billion was invested in order to create the infrastructure for Sochi and the neighboring mountain villages to host the Winter Olympic Games. There were tons of people there, 55,000 workers, 37,000 security officers, 13,000 media, 15,000 volunteers, 3 billion viewers, and hundreds of thousands of spectators. It's an absolutely mammoth project. And to give you some sense of perspective, the Winter Olympics is about 1/3 the size of the Summer Olympics. So you can basically take most of those numbers and multiply them by 3 to see how big the Olympics are at a venue like London or Beijing. The Olympics themselves are organized by, of course, the International Olympic Committee and the local organizing committee, in this case in Sochi. And ATOS is the worldwide IT partner for the Olympics. So ATOS is the organization that actually supports the games directly. I'm, of course, there working with NBC. And NBC has a really amazing history of broadcasting Olympic Games over the decades. And as you may have heard, recently signed a contract to guarantee that NBC will be bringing you the Olympics at least through the year 2032. So we're really looking forward to being a part of your family and a part of your Olympic experience moving forward. The broadcast is also a mammoth event. This year in Sochi, we broadcast 1,500 hours of content across our broadcast network and the NBC Sports Network. NBCOlympics.com, the digital property, had over 1,000 hours of original content and streamed every single competition. So if you were a sports fan, you could tune into NBCOlympics.com and watch every competition live in all of its glory. It costs a lot to put that together, of course. There's the cost of the rights, which NBC does not disclose, but estimates put it at somewhere between $500 million and $750 million just for the rights of the broadcasting the Winter Olympics. And that's before the cost of production, of building infrastructure, shipping equipment, sending people, and actually producing the Winter Olympic Games. So it's a very, very high-cost proposition and project. But it was enormously successful and paid off tremendously. We reached over 243 million people in the United States, which is the area for which NBC holds the rights to broadcast Olympic coverage. We had an average primetime viewership of 21 million, which is very respectable and places Sochi as the second most watched Winter Olympics in history after Lillehammer in 1994, which had the perhaps notorious characteristic of including the Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan drama. So we'll probably never reach that, but beyond Lillehammer, we did excellently. We reached 76% of homes in the U.S., and there was a halo effect that boosted ratings and viewership across NBC News, Entertainment, and our affiliates around the country. Perhaps even more amazing are the digital records that were set. On NBCOlympics.com, more than 10.8 million hours of video were consumed by 62 million unique viewers. Now, if you put that into perspective against the population of the United States, that means just about 1 in every 5 people in the United States, from the tiniest baby to the oldest grandparent, watched some Olympics on NBCOlympics.com or through one of our apps. The US-Canada hockey game was the most watched digital broadcast in history with 2.1 million viewers. So pretty extraordinary achievements, to be sure. My role during the games is not this one, nor is it that one. I am simply the Microsoft technology consultant, which means I support some of the core Microsoft technologies we put in place behind the scenes, including Windows Server and Client, our management technologies, and, of course, SharePoint and Office 365. So I'm a very small piece in a very big and fantastic engine called NBC Sports, and specifically NBC Sports IT. Now, when I arrived in Sochi in late January, the park was still being built. There were dirt roads, fences were being constructed, and we had the entire Olympic Park pretty much to ourselves. There were only a couple of hundred people working for NBC in place in Sochi when I arrived. In fact, even our offices were still being constructed. Computers were being unpacked, chairs and desks were being set up, and very rapidly, over the course of 3 weeks, we went from this environment to a fully functioning organization of almost 3,000 employees. because over those 3 weeks, plane loads of people arrived in Sochi from the United States and from other places to get to work quickly. And that, of course, made it bedlam in the IT organization. People arrived needing their laptops and desktops, their applications, their printers, their services, even their mobile phones. And it was absolutely crazy as we went from several hundred people to 3,000 in the course of a couple of weeks. During those weeks, NBC employees and contractors eat, drink, and even sleep the Olympic Games. We're working so hard, laying miles of cables, sometimes in very harsh conditions, setting up offices in even very remote locations, establishing lots of data and storage and capacity to broadcast digital video across the continents. This is my friend Matt standing in front of a rack that contains 270 terabytes of storage, a quarter petabyte of storage that is in fact replicated to New York, creating over half a petabyte of storage. But it magically all comes together. Studios are built, research is done, scripts are written, satellite links and communications are established, and it all comes down to that magical opening night when we begin our broadcast to the American audience. Allow me to take you behind the doors of NBC and to look at our SharePoint implementation. We'll start at the most logical starting point, which is the homepage of our SharePoint-based intranet, AliHome. AliHome was the name, the brand, the identity we gave to our SharePoint intranet, and our goal was to communicate to users that if they needed something, it was on AliHome. If they were looking for a resource, if they needed to get to work, if they needed to collaborate with each other, they could start at AliHome. This is what our intranet homepage looked like. You'll notice it's a very clean layout. It's focused on adoption and navigation. It's not a corporate communications battleground where every department is trying to make themselves heard by the employee base. It's really about the users, understanding what they want and what they're looking for. We even allowed the intranet homepage to be accessible by anonymous users. But as you can see in the lower right corner, we suggested that if you sign in, you'll be able to access more resources. And when users did sign in, they would get, in fact, additional resources and the NBC Olympics suite bar at the top. Now, our goal was to drive adoption with our intranet by emphasizing the message, it's on AliHome. If there's something you need, you can start on AliHome. Now, in order to drive adoption, we took a very simple three-step approach that is, while simple, incredibly effective. Deliver value. If it's valuable, it will be adopted. And then place more valuable resources, additional valuable resources, in a discoverable location. So it's about delivering value that itself gets adopted and drives discoverability of additional value. Let's take a look at how we did that. In the case of the Olympics, when an employee arrives, they're given a new phone, a mobile phone from a Russian provider that has its own Russian SIM, and every single employee gets a new mobile phone for the course of the games in order to keep telecommunications costs reasonable. Therefore, you as an employee don't know your own phone number right away, nor do you know the phone numbers of your colleagues. Therefore, we know that every employee almost immediately is going to be wanting a phone directory. So smack dab center of our intranet, we have a phone directory. We know it's something our users are going to want and need. And when they go to the phone directory, they can look up their phone number and they can look up phone numbers of their peers. Now, this is the first bit of value that we're delivering, and we'll come back and continue the story in a few moments. But let me talk for a brief moment about this specific application, our phone directory. This is an ASP.NET application. It is not part of SharePoint. It's running on its own ASP.NET web server, IIS server. However, it's exposed within the SharePoint intranet using a page viewer web part, which creates an iframe of sorts. The application has no branding. The application itself has no top or left navigation. So when we plug it into a page viewer web part, the navigation is provided by SharePoint. So it's clean and simple. And if you think about it from a conceptual perspective, what we have been doing with our phone directory application ever since Beijing is exactly what Microsoft is doing now with the app model. Apps run off-box and are exposed within the SharePoint environment. So that's exactly what we're doing here. Now, as I talk about how we do what we do, I'll be giving you slides that describe exactly what I say. So everything I just said about this application is here in an orangish box on the slide. Now, in order to save time, the rest of the slides that have the actual text are going to be hidden. But when you download the slides for this presentation, you'll get all of the discussion about how we did what we did. So don't worry about writing down copious notes. Enjoy the stories and know that when you download the slides, the keynotes will be there for you. So let's return to our adoption story. It all starts with delivering known high-value resources to your users. In our case, it was the phone directory. We knew that people needed it, and so by providing it, it would be adopted. And then about providing additional value in a discoverable location. So when users came to AliHome to look up their phone number and the phone number of their managers and peers, they could see in the upper right-hand corner resources that they would need to work and live effectively in Russia. For example, we had maps to help them get around and understand where things were located. We had common Russian words and phrases available for them. And as they continued to visit the intranet, in the left navigation, we had links to very important resources. So the quick launch on our intranet homepage was all about providing the resources we thought would be absolutely most important at any given period of time. And in fact, we changed these links at opening ceremonies. Resources users needed before opening ceremonies are different than what they needed after opening ceremonies once the broadcast began. One of the resources we knew users would need is a link to Google USA. As you might know if you've traveled or worked internationally, when you open up a browser and type www.google.com to do a search, it takes you to Google's local site. In this case, it took users to the Russian site, which was in Cyrillic and therefore not particularly helpful to our users. They needed to know how to get to the USA version of google.com, which is done by typing google.com/NCR, or no country redirect. We told users how to do that, but we also wanted to give them a link from their homepage in case they forgot. Other resources were located in the Olympics resources menu. So here you can see that we had links to a lot of different resources, and just as a point of reference, many of these resources were located in a separate site collection. So while the intranet homepage was its own site collection, the actual resources on the intranet were a separate site collection in order to support security and distribution of those resources. I knew, for example, that I was going to do a proof of concept of the Colligo briefcase tool to push some of these resources to mobile devices. So we were able to put them in a separate site collection, which made it easier to manage the distribution and security around those resources. Among those resources were our conference room calendar. Everyone needs one and wants one. We used SharePoint to support ours. We had information about transportation, so people could find out when and where shuttles were running. And one of those resources was the Transportation Guide, a PDF, which you could open up. And as a point of implementation, we decided to allow inline viewing of PDFs. As you might know, in SharePoint 2010 and 2013, when a user opens a PDF by default, the PDF is downloaded to their computer, and then they have to upload it, or then they have to open it separately. That takes an extra couple of clicks, which causes user pain. Now, the reason Microsoft implemented SharePoint that way is that PDF is inherently an insecure format because it can include script. So any PDF can be opened and execute script under that user's credentials and potentially cause damage. So there's a security concern that Microsoft erred on the conservative side and does not allow inline viewing, that is, browser-based viewing of the PDFs. In our environment, we knew we had control over the PDFs that would go onto the SharePoint environment, and we were less concerned about security in the case of PDFs than we were about productivity in the case of PDFs. So we went ahead and enabled inline viewing of PDFs so that a user on the transportation site could click the link to the transport guide and it would open directly in their browser. Another way we drove adoption and engagement with our SharePoint environment was by improving navigation. I've been working with SharePoint for a very long time, and probably the number one question I get from enterprises is how to provide effective navigation when SharePoint resources are distributed. If everything in SharePoint is in a single site collection, navigation isn't really an issue. You add a new site or page or library and it gets automatically added to the quick launch and or the global navigation. But as soon as you have resources in more than one site collection, more than one web application, or more than one farm, there's no universal navigation capability in SharePoint. How do you solve that? Well, there are a couple of approaches, and I'm going to share with you the approach we used at the Olympics because it also helped drive adoption and the discovery of valuable resources. Remember our homepage, Ollie Home. I mentioned the fact that it was focused on adoption and navigation. There's a very clean navigation structure that we began to explore. Very frequently used resources are in the quick launch of the intranet homepage. Other resources are in the global navigation of the intranet homepage. So if I need to get to work, if I need to find something, I start on Ollie Home and then I get to work. Let's say, for example, I'm an engineer. I want to go to my engineering team site. It makes perfectly logical sense that I can find it under Departments Engineering. Now notice when I land on the engineering site, the global navigation to every other resource in the environment is no longer available. That's because I've landed where I needed to land. I'm in my work context. I have the resources and the ability to do what it is I need to do as an engineer. If I need something completely different, if I need, for example, to book one of the corporate conference rooms, I simply go back to the intranet homepage. How do I do that? Well, at NBC Olympics, we made one and only one customization to our master page, the site icon in the upper left. Remember how SharePoint treats this site icon. If you click the site icon, it takes you to the root site of the site collection. We modified it so that when you go to the site icon, it takes you back to the intranet homepage. So you always can get home by clicking the logo. And in fact, when we did usability tests, we found that this is what users actually expect. If they click a logo in the upper left corner of a page, they expect to kind of go to the home page. So we not only improved navigation, but we also delivered what users actually expected. Now that I'm back at the home page, let's say I need to get to the corporate calendar, I go to resources, I go to the conference room calendar, and again, I'm in a resource. I'm in a context to do something. And if I need to do something else, I click the logo and I go back to the home page. So users were always coming back to the intranet homepage, which again was not a dumping ground of corporate information. It was a navigation tool, just like the start menu in Windows, just like the start screens on your phones and mobile devices. If people want to switch between apps, they go home. Users understand that these days. They get it. They actually expect it. And so by providing this, we had absolutely zero questions or support calls about navigation. People just simply found what they needed to find. At NBC Sports during the Olympics, our primary workload or use case for SharePoint is collaboration, probably like most of you. We have departments, teams, and projects that need support and need to be able to collaborate with each other. Let me take a quick stroll through our implementation of collaboration and show you some of the things we found helped drive adoption and usability of SharePoint team sites. This is our engineering team site. as we deployed it initially. So this was the beginning of the engineering team site. And you'll notice on the homepage of the team site, we got rid of a lot of the trimmings that are there by default in SharePoint 2013. We got rid of those 5 tiles. We got rid of the news feed, primarily because we simply didn't need it for the Olympics. And instead, we replaced it with very simple, clear text that asked, what do you need to do? And gave engineers quick links to what we thought they needed to do as a team. Now, in the case of the engineers, there were basically 2 major workloads we needed to be able to support. The first was, and the most important, was an issues list that allowed them to track and monitor technical issues. In order to do that, they needed to be able to manage who had access to that list, who were members of the engineering group. So we needed to give them the ability to manage their own group memberships. Now let's start with those group memberships. As you know, we could train a user to click the cog in the upper right corner, go to Site Settings, go to People and Groups, then find the right group and add members to it. But that's a lot of steps. Instead, on the homepage of this team site, we gave them a link directly to the members group of the site. So if an owner needed to manage the membership of the group, they could simply click that link. It would take them directly to the group, and then it's pretty discoverable how to add a new user. We also had, of course, lots of other lists on the site. I mentioned the technical issues list. There was also a venue check-in list, which was basically a list that each venue used to make sure all of their equipment was working at the beginning of each day. So this venue check-in list was a standard SharePoint list with a form attached to it. Now you'll notice what we did to drive adoption and usability of the form. 2 major things. First, we used content editor web parts in the form itself to give clear instructions for how to prepare to do your check-in. We also made great use of the description field under each field. So for example, on the summary, we told them exactly what it was we needed them to input. Now, and in many cases, when you're doing a form, you need to have a drop-down list of choices. This is our issues list. Our issues list was, again, technical issues, and there were categories that those issues could fall into. The category drop-down was a lookup list, a lookup field against a list on the site. Because we wanted, rather than to hard code the options in the list, we wanted to give some of the engineering managers the ability to easily maintain that back-end list of categories. So if they needed to add or remove a category, they could do it very easily. So we used a lookup field for that. Now, in order to give managers a way to easily define the lookup list, we added it to the description field. So what you see here allowed a manager to click and go to the list that itself drove the drop-down list. Again, as a little tip here, all I'm doing is using the description field to say, here's a link to the backend list. The browser renders that link as a link automatically, and then they can click it and go to the backend list and make changes. Super, super simple. And again, don't forget, all of these little tips I'm giving you are in hidden slides in the deck, so you don't have to remember all of them. We also used libraries, just like you. One of our libraries was for our Daily Olympian, the newsletter that all employees read. Now, in this case, we wanted to make sure that when users went to the library that stored the issues of the Daily Olympian, they could not only access back issues, but more importantly, that they could really easily read today's issue. So notice the way we structured this document library. Instead of the standard library, we trimmed the columns down to only the name of the issue, as you can see on the right, and then we created a page viewer web part on the page that would expose the current issue. So what you see here is a page viewer web part that's exposing the current issue of the Daily Olympian. Now, how did we do that? Well, we had this page viewer web part pointing to the file called Daily Olympian Today. Every day there was a new issue. The new issue got saved twice. It got saved with that issue and date, and it got saved as today, overwriting yesterday's issue. So every single day, the issue was saved twice with the current date and as Daily Olympian Today. The page viewer web part was always looking for Daily Olympian Today, and so it was very easy for us to ensure that when people came to this page, they would see the current issue. And again, we allowed inline viewing of PDFs, and so the PDF was visible. Pretty cool, huh? Simple and effective. We did something similar with our channel guide. Within NBC Olympics, we have an internal TV system that allows us to tune into many of the different camera positions across the Olympics. That's our channel guide. And those channel guides were stored in a document library, and you can see the library web part being shown here. Again, we got rid of all of the other columns, dates, modified by, all of those kinds of things, so that if you wanted to open a specific channel guide, you could click it within this list. But then we also turned the current version of the channel guide into an HTML document, simply saved it as HTML from Word, and exposed that document as a page viewer web part. So once again, we have a page viewer web part. This time, it's looking at an HTML version of the actual channel guide. Now let's return to the main theme of how we drove adoption and engagement. We started our discussion by describing how we used the phone directory as an item of high value to drive initial adoption. We knew users had to have that phone directory. So by putting it in SharePoint and telling them it's on Olihome, we knew they would actually go to Olihome. And then we could start delivering additional value and functionality, which as long as we made it discoverable, they would find. And it's at this point that we're able to start really focusing on functionality that is perhaps more directly relevant to the overall success of SharePoint, to the ROI of SharePoint. The phone directory itself was super important to users, but in all reality, didn't necessarily deliver ROI for SharePoint. But once users were in SharePoint, we could start delivering functionality that delivered higher ROI to the business as a whole. One of those areas of functionality was IT self-support. Our IT organization is very slim. We have a few front-end help desk people and a couple of senior IT people on staff at any time, supporting thousands of users. We needed to empower our employees, empower our users with self-support tools so that we could reduce the burden on the help desk, reduce help desk calls, and reduce costs. And of course, along the way, we also empowered users, which made them feel like IT was on their side, that we were supporting them, that we were not a block or an obstacle, but rather were very responsive to them. So IT self-support is a big ROI capability that we wanted to deliver within SharePoint. We did that on our intranet homepage from the Information Technology menu. There was a link to the help desk homepage where they could learn how to contact the help desk directly through email, phone number, etc. But then we also focused on three major capabilities that we knew were high value to users and high cost for IT. The first was simply reducing help desk calls with an FAQ. The second was printer installation, and the third was application installation. Let's take a look at each. First, the FAQ. We used a very simple SharePoint list to drive an FAQ so that if users had questions, rather than spending a lot of time on the phone with them, we could simply say, hey, go to the FAQ, the answer is right there. For example, when users arrived at the facility with their own devices, they would need to know how to configure the proxy server to get out to the intranet. So this SharePoint list provided that kind of answer. Very simple two-column list, question and answer. We styled the view of the list so that items in the list were grouped by question. So each question became a collapsible item with the answer being expanded. Very, very simple, but certainly reduced the amount of time we had to spend on help desk calls. And as users learned about the FAQ, it reduced the number of calls as well because they simply went to the FAQ before they called the help desk. The second area of self-support that we wanted to deliver was printer installation. And this is a huge win. We started doing this back in Torino, and it's been amazingly successful since then. When users need to connect to a printer with their laptop or desktop, they can simply go to this page and double-click the printer. From the Information Technology menu, they go to the printer installation page. That page displays a list of printers, and they double-click. How hard is this? About 5 minutes of work. This is one of the simplest pages you can possibly create in SharePoint. It's a page with a page viewer web part. Now, page viewer web parts normally are associated with displaying web resources in an iframe-like environment. But this page viewer web part, instead of going to a web page address, instead of going to an HTTP address, is going to a file address. And that file address is simply / the server name. As you know, if you go to your Windows Start menu and type / server name, you get a list of shares. If it's a print server, you get a list of shared printers. So all we're doing is exposing the server's share list in the page viewer web part. Users can double-click the printer, and they are off to work. Now, you might wonder how they know which printer to install. That's actually pretty easy. The naming scheme to NBC employees is very obvious. If you know you're working in Control A, IBC Control A is clearly your printer. And if you're confused at all, every printer had a big giant label on it with its name. So finding the printer wasn't the problem. And because of this page, installing it wasn't either. Again, remember that the tips I'm giving you are in orange boxes. Many of the slides are hidden, but this one I wanted to just use to remind us that those tips are in the slide deck. Application installation was the third scenario we wanted to support. And so from the help desk menu, users could go to a page that listed the custom applications that they might need to install. They could click a link and it would take them to a page with instructions about how to install that application. Most of our applications are .NET Click Once applications, so you don't even need to be an administrator of your system to install it. And so we had a place where users could self-serve the installation of the applications they needed to get their jobs done. So as you can see, this self-support empowered users and reduced costs and burdens on the IT help desk. We were now delivering value that was valuable not only to the users, but that was extremely valuable to the organization and delivered real ROI from the SharePoint implementation. By getting users into SharePoint with value that they perceived as high value, we were able to start delivering value in a discoverable way that was valuable to the organization as a whole. Let's put the pieces together for some Olympic lessons about driving successful engagement and adoption. It all starts with delivering value, with providing resources, capabilities, or functionality in SharePoint that solves user pain, that gives them something they want. And it's really about providing value as users perceive it, not necessarily yet as the business perceives it. Because if you can convince users that there's something they want or need, they will adopt it. Then they're in your SharePoint environment, and you can focus on delivering new functionality and capabilities and resources that is perhaps more directly relevant to the overall success of the business and of SharePoint. And if you make those new resources and capabilities visible and easily navigable, users will actually discover them as they go to consume the resources that they think are valuable. So it sounds kind of strange, but you really do need to give users something that they want before they will adopt something that the business wants them to adopt. And if you focus on that, as simple as it is, you will in fact deliver gold medal engagement and adoption for your SharePoint implementation. And with that, I'd like to say thank you, or as we say in Hawaiian, mahalo, and a hui ho until next time. Now we're going to be spending some time with Barry Jinks coming up here, and then we'll have time for Q&A. But after today, please do reach out to me through Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or email, and I'm more than happy to carry on the conversation and be a part of your successful journey in SharePoint. You'll be able to get to the slides and the recording for this meeting at itunity.com/go/Dan Holme, and you'll also be able to get to the recording from Colligo's website. And speaking of Colligo, I've been working with Colligo for a number of years. They're a phenomenal team with high-quality products that deliver real value, particularly in regards to adoption and engagement, because many of their products help put SharePoint where it needs to be for users, which isn't always in a browser, and sometimes needs to be on the desktop or on a device. So let me hand it over to Barry Jinks, President and CEO of Colligo, to tell you a little bit about what's going on there.
Well, thanks, Dan, and thanks everybody for attending the webinar today. I'd like to spend a few minutes exploring the Briefcase for iOS app in a bit more detail. Colligo Briefcase for iOS is a great way to access SharePoint on a mobile device, whether it's an iPhone or an iPad. Through the application, workers can view, edit, and add documents and list items in SharePoint sites right from their smartphone or tablet. Here's some of the benefits. People can collaborate more effectively with a touch-centric business application that's built specifically for SharePoint to use on an iPad or smartphone. They can be more productive on the road by working offline. In addition to viewing documents and lists, Briefcase provides enhanced sync technology that supports offline editing too. There's increased security. Data is encrypted in motion and at rest. The app provides the ability to open and annotate PDFs. And through a central administration console, organizations can actually push out selected content and settings to users' devices. So with hundreds of thousands of end users, Briefcase has been proven in many applications and many industries over the last 3+ years. Well, this is the standard brag slide that everybody has. We just wanted to sort of put it up quickly to give you a sense that we're a pretty credible company. We're experienced. Our focus has been always on helping increase engagement and adoption with enterprise information systems like SharePoint. We're established. We're a Microsoft Gold application development partner. We're technology driven. We have 5 patents awarded in data synchronization collaboration and 1 more pending patent. We've got a lot of great customers, a bunch of awards, and we're pretty proud to say that we are an experienced supplier who can be a great partner for your company. So let's have a look at the business problem Colligo is helping its customers to solve. This slide is from the Gartner Symposium last year. It describes the problems that many IT departments are grappling with today. With the introduction of cloud services and mobile apps, it's a real challenge for IT to blend these new applications with information and legacy platforms while creating a great collaboration experience for end users. All of this needs to be balanced with the risks of data loss and protection of the organization's intellectual property. Many new devices and services are available, and users want to bring their own devices and apps with them to the workplace. While file sharing services like Dropbox can provide a great user experience, they lack advanced capabilities for governance and records management and can introduce unacceptable security risks. The need to support mobile apps can add complexity to IT and drive up support costs. A popular solution to these problems is to move to centralized collaboration around a platform like SharePoint and tie the legacy systems into it. But if you decide to do that, how can you drive adoption and productivity of mobile users on SharePoint while providing the capability for IT to govern the SharePoint data that's being created, edited, and shared on mobile devices? That's the problem Colligo solves. Imagine if all the workers in your organization had access to all their content on any device, and it could be centrally managed and secure. Well, that day's come. A few years ago, Colligo introduced a new collaboration platform that enables organizations to deploy SharePoint to mobile and desktop devices. Elements that are part of the Colligo solution are the administrator and Briefcase apps. Apps are available on iOS, Mac, and Windows, and also Android is coming pretty soon. These apps are centrally managed by the administrator product. Apps are designed to increase user adoption of SharePoint for collaboration. They enable users to easily connect with SharePoint on-prem with Office 365 and OneDrive for Business. Some products also integrate Exchange for email management in SharePoint. Well, at Colligo, we help organizations optimize the use of SharePoint on-prem in Office 365 or OneDrive for Business. The key problems we address are worker productivity. Our solution makes it possible for employees to access the content they need in SharePoint from any device wherever they are. Secondly, system engagement. Getting employees engaged with SharePoint and willing to work with it is often a significant challenge for companies. We always put a lot of emphasis on creating natural user experiences for our software, so employees actually use it to access SharePoint. And thirdly, IT control. We enable IT and business managers to push out selected content and settings to user devices so they're in control and they can govern that content. So let's look at the apps a bit more closely. What do they actually do? This diagram breaks that down into several layers that I'd quickly like to describe. The lowest layer is the infrastructure that represents the basic communication, governance, and security capabilities of the Briefcase apps. As I said earlier, Briefcase for iOS provides central configuration and content management capabilities. This is the box on the lower right. Going left from there, you can see that the data is encrypted both in motion, either through VPN or HTTPS, or at rest on the device through AES 256. Next, both claims-based and forms-based authentication are supported for a wide range of applications. Briefcase can even manage data throughput by limited synchronization when the user is on the cellular network. Finally, Briefcase for iOS is compatible with many popular mobile device management platforms. Next up is the foundation capabilities layer. Briefcase is a flexible app with many powerful capabilities that, when combined with SharePoint, can support a wide range of business processes on mobile devices. Starting from the left, Briefcase supports editing of documents, of course, but also editing of metadata and lists. Metadata can drive workflows on the SharePoint server. If the application is purely the distribution of documents, read-only permissions can be set on the server and will be reflected through the app so that users can only view documents on their iPhone or iPad. Next, documents themselves can be emailed from the app as attachments or links. Emails can also be opened and read directly in the app in cases where the business process involves email management. One of the really great features of Briefcase is its robust capability to selectively cache content offline for viewing when there isn't a strong Wi-Fi or cellular connection. This drives user adoption since users can truly access their data anywhere. There's also robust support for team calendars and contact lists. Finally, on the far right, there are some advanced features like the ability to upload photos either from a camera or photo library or the ability to annotate PDFs and save these edits back to SharePoint. This is a particularly strong feature for work that involves governance, such as boards of directors or government workers. The top layer is the actual use cases that many organizations have deployed Briefcase for. With careful design of SharePoint coupled with the built-in features of Briefcase for iOS, Colligo customers have successfully deployed the app to boards of directors and management, field service teams such as in oil and gas, sales teams in pharmaceutical, for example, professional services organizations and consultants such as architecture, construction, and engineering, educators and students in K-12, government, both elected officials and staff, and many other applications. Now let's look quickly at a few of the features of the app in more depth. One of the key features of the app, of course, is the ability to view SharePoint files, including Office documents, PDFs, images, and other file types. But you can also open and read emails within the app. It has a powerful capability to preview files, to find the right document. You can view document properties, including SharePoint-supported metadata, check files in and out, and receive alerts when items are added or favorites are updated. Briefcase has a pretty powerful capability for working with PDF documents. You can use the search field to find items quickly within PDF documents. Also annotate PDFs with a freehand drawing tool, add text to the document, highlight or strike out text, and post sticky note comments. Also, it includes the ability to work offline because of advanced caching and sync and conflict resolution. So it ensures that any offline edits that you've made to PDF documents are handled correctly when connectivity is restored. Editing is also a big part of the app. You can edit files, lists, and metadata. You can create and sync new list items. Also, photos are supported, so photo uploading them from the camera or the photo library. And also, you can upload content from third-party apps. So if you have another app on the iPad or the iPhone that creates content, you can upload that to SharePoint directly through Briefcase. You can also enter metadata on upload when a new content is being added and categorize by content type. Briefcase has a powerful ability to share files as well. One of those ways is to take a document in SharePoint and create a link from it, and then that can be shared in emails and sent out as a link to other email recipients. Those links can also be copied and pasted into other applications and documents on the iPad or iPhone. And finally, full documents can be emailed as attachments to external recipients. Colligo Briefcase delivers the highest level of security to ensure that sensitive corporate data is encrypted, locked, and removable on demand. It supports major MDM systems, which allows SharePoint content to be remotely wiped, and it also allows jailbroken devices to be blocked by the MDM solution that the organization has standardized on. Briefcase encrypts credentials and passcodes, and administrators can restrict access to content on a site-by-site basis. Colligo Briefcase for iOS comes in 3 editions. The Lite and Pro editions are available on the Apple App Store. The Enterprise Edition can be purchased directly from Colligo or one of our partners. Businesses and government agencies are advised to purchase the Enterprise Edition as it comes with full support and has the most advanced features and capabilities, and also the highest level of security. The Enterprise Edition is the only one that supports advanced features such as PDF annotation. In addition to that, the biggest difference between the Pro and Enterprise versions is the ability to centrally deploy and manage the app via the administrator. This includes remote wipe of data, a significant security feature if the device is stolen or the employee leaves the company. The Enterprise Edition package also includes advanced deployment services, custom branding, and Colligo technical support. We're pretty proud of the user experience, which is the special sauce for driving adoption. So if you're looking to get a quick feeling of how the app works, our highly rated free Lite Edition for iPad and iPhone can be downloaded immediately from the App Store. Later in this webinar, you'll learn more details on how to access it. Bear in mind that it has a few limitations that you can see from the chart. It only supports one-way sync to the device, so you can't actually edit or add any new content. Also, it supports just a single site and has a hard limit of 50 megabytes of data. Finally, I want to mention a couple of other products, Briefcase for Windows and Briefcase for Mac. We're particularly proud of the recently launched Briefcase for Mac. It's the world's first product to integrate SharePoint into the Finder, providing the most optimal SharePoint user experience on Mac computers. Both Briefcase for Mac and Briefcase for Windows deliver a productive desktop experience, both online and offline. They enable users to easily view, sync, share, edit, file, and tag SharePoint documents, and with rich support for metadata. To learn more about these products, visit colligo.com/products. Well, thanks everyone for your attention today. I'm going to now pass it over to Jinaz.
Thank you, Barry, for your presentation. I'd like to thank both of our speakers and now welcome questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A console to ask your questions. I see we've got quite a few questions here. Let's start with a question for Dan. Dan, you had such limited time for training thousands of users. How did you do it? What was key? What is your best advice for ensuring user adoption of SharePoint?
That's a great question, and I think there are a couple of points I'd like to make related to training on SharePoint 2013. The first is it's definitely important to deliver training to users in the context of their work for the things that really matter for them to be successful. So when you're thinking about the solution that you're going to deliver on SharePoint, identify those factors that are critical to success. Those things will usually be about basic usability and things like security and compliance and information management. Put those things where users can get to them easily, right in the user interface of SharePoint. I showed you some examples of that in the presentation where we built in instructions directly into the team site. We just use Content Editor web parts, but there's many other approaches and there's some great third-party solutions out there for embedding training into SharePoint. And we'll be discussing several of them on itunity.com, so you can check out our adoption section and learn about some of those solutions. The second point I'd like to make is that SharePoint's user interface is simply much more discoverable than it has been in the past. You can put a user who's never used SharePoint in front of SharePoint 2013 and they can pretty much figure it out. I've had experiences with that personally where my family, my 70-year-old parents figured out how to use my Office 365 calendar without me even asking. And also from a business perspective, where in London we used SharePoint 2010 and we had to embed a lot of training into the user experience, but in SharePoint 2013 we had to do very little of that. The user experience is simply discoverable. And part of that is because users these days are more ready to adapt to new user experiences. They're carrying around smartphones that are more powerful than their computers were just a few years ago. All of the apps have very different user experiences. So the user base, regardless of their age, is accustomed to bouncing back and forth between very different user interfaces and user experiences and figuring it out. And by the way, that's one thing I really like about some of Colligo's solutions for providing access to SharePoint directly on mobile devices, is that the experience feels familiar. If you're on an iPad, for example, it's a little jarring to interact with SharePoint through your web browser. You can do it, it just doesn't feel like a native capability. Whereas Colligo's tools really provide that native iPad experience to SharePoint and therefore make it more immediately discoverable and adoptable. So focus on the most important aspects for success and deliver training on that. Provide links to resources for everything else. Don't underestimate the discoverability of SharePoint's user experience, and where possible, make that user experience as comfortable as possible for your users.
Thanks, Dan. We have a related question. Someone asks, Dan, you mentioned that discoverability, value, and adoption are key. How can businesses apply this to SharePoint planning? What can organizations do to ensure SharePoint delivers on these for end users?
I'm glad you picked up on that point in my presentation, because that cycle of discoverability, value, and adoption is really a critical one. And it all starts with understanding what will be of value to your users and putting it into your SharePoint implementation. And I guarantee you, if you open up a conversation and listen to your users, you'll get a laundry list of things they find are kludgy or things they find get in the way of them being successful with their jobs. And out of that laundry list, you will find things that you can deliver quickly and easily with out-of-box capabilities of SharePoint. So put those front and center in your SharePoint implementation. In our case, it was the phone directory. We knew users had to have a phone directory. There would be pull from our user base. There would be demand for a phone directory. So by putting that in our SharePoint intranet front and center, we knew there would be a reason for users to go to our intranet. And from there, if we kept clean navigation and presented other solutions that were also valuable to our users, they would discover those solutions. So for example, we could put our IT help desk with its solutions for self-service printer installation and application installation. Users would go to the phone directory, they would see the support menu, and they would naturally be able to find the solutions in that menu. And that then turned them into sticky customers and kept them coming back to the intranet. So by understanding what is of value to your users and keeping those solutions front and center, you're able to drive adoption not only of the individual solutions, but of the entire SharePoint implementation. And that cycle is exceptionally effective. And the burden to making it successful is to listen to your users and to understand what they're asking for. The other key to this cycle is to continue to deliver new solutions in a rapid, agile way. Don't deploy SharePoint and let it sit for several months before you push something else out that's of value to your users. In fact, one of the little tips I like to give my customers is take that laundry list of things that users want and set a couple of them aside that you know you can do easily, but wait until 2 or 4 weeks after you've deployed SharePoint to push those out and make a big deal of the fact that you've deployed these new solutions to bring new users who haven't yet come to SharePoint and to emphasize to users that SharePoint is in fact where IT will be innovating rapidly in your organization.
Barry, we have a question for you about Colligo Briefcase. How many Colligo customers actually use your administration product when doing a mobile deployment?
Well, thanks, Janaz. That's a good question. Almost all of our customers that deploy Briefcase for iOS also deploy the administrator product. And the reason is that it makes it quite easy for them to push content out to users. That way the users don't really have to know how to access SharePoint content on their device. It just automatically kind of appears there. And secondly, quite often they want to set they put settings on those devices, custom settings. For example, disable printing or perhaps disable emailing from within the app, and the administrator product lets them do that. So it's, as I said, it's widely deployed within our customer base.
Thanks, Barry. Dan, we have a multi-part question for you here. Dan mentioned a number of megatrends like social, along with new Microsoft technology to leverage for Rio 2016. Dan, can you share the vision of what you see for Oli Home in 2016 and what things we should consider over the next 2 years for our own SharePoint deployments?
That's a good question as well, and I think my answer is going to sound a lot like Microsoft, which is cloud first, mobile first. I have no doubt that the cloud's going to be a much more important element of our architecture in Rio than it was in previous games. partly because we are going to want to be able to provide more universal access to information and solutions. So we'll want to put those on Office 365, and we're going to want to be able to provide a first-class experience to mobile devices, which will be possible in Office 365. And so I expect we'll probably end up putting Ollie Home, our intranet, in Office 365 to provide a universal intranet to our users both in Rio and in our headquarters in Stamford and Burbank. We will put a subset of information and solutions in Office 365 and another set of information and solutions in our on-premises farms, which I imagine by that point in time will be running the next version of SharePoint. And so we will have a true hybrid environment where users start in the cloud, they navigate to solutions, some of which are in the cloud and some of which are in our on-premise farms. And that's the vision of what I expect we'll end up building for Rio 2016.
It looks like we have time for one last question. This one's for you, Barry. Barry, how much training should I expect for end users to learn how to use Briefcase?
We get the training question quite often from our customers, but I think if you get a chance to try the app, you'll find that it's really, really easy to use. It's very, very intuitive. And we build our apps to improve user adoption, to increase user productivity. Our feeling is that if the apps are hard to use and they need a lot of training, or if the app works intermittently, people are not going to use it. So it's really, really important that all of the apps that we make are easy to use and easy to learn.
Thank you everyone for your questions. I see here there are many we didn't get to. We'll follow up with you after the webinar. I'd also like to thank both of our speakers for their insightful answers. Dan and Barry, we really appreciate your time and expert tips in driving collaboration and engagement with SharePoint. To speak with either Barry or Dan, please feel free to reach out to them. Their email and Twitter addresses are here on the screen. To conclude, we would like to thank all of you, our webinar guests, for joining us today. You will receive an email from Colligo following this webinar that includes a number of useful and free resources. You'll be able to get a copy of today's webinar presentation slides and watch the recording. You'll also be able to download SharePoint on the Go, a free buyer's guide to mobile SharePoint solutions. And you'll get a link to your very own free Colligo Briefcase Lite from the App Store to bring SharePoint to your iPhone or iPad. Thank you again for joining us today.